In a small town nestled among the Colorado mountains, a corrupt bully brutally slapped an elderly widow, knocking her to the floor in a crowded diner. The entire room watched in stunned silence, frozen in fear, too afraid to utter a single word. The bully laughed, believing himself an untouchable king in his small domain. He thought his power was absolute, but he had made one fatal mistake. He had no idea that her son was a Navy SEAL, and that he and his loyal canine partner were about to step through that very door. The air in Aspen Ridge, Colorado, carried the crisp, clean promise of approaching winter. The mountains that cradled the town formed a breathtaking tapestry of gold, crimson, and deep evergreen. A light frost had silvered the edges of the pine needles overnight. Now, as the morning sun climbed over the peaks, it melted into glistening droplets that caught the light like tiny diamonds. The scent of pine and damp earth wrapped around everything like a constant, welcome companion. This was the peaceful haven Clara Bennett had been searching for. Clara, an elderly widow with soft white hair, pinned neatly in a bun, and eyes the color of a gentle sky, pulled her knitted shawl tighter around her shoulders. She had navigated the storms of a long life with a quiet grace, often mistaken for fragility. But beneath that gentle surface lay a core of resilient steel, forged in love, loss, and the steadfast raising of her remarkable son. That son, Reed Bennett, had recently purchased a beautiful secluded house on the edge of Lake Serenity, just outside of town, insisting she deserved a sanctuary away from the noise of the city. This extended vacation was his gift to her, a place where she could finally breathe. She pushed open the glass door of the mountaintop diner, a bell tinkling cheerfully to announce her arrival. The diner was the heart of Aspen Ridge, a cozy haven of worn wooden booths, red vinyl stools, and the comforting aroma of freshly brewed coffee, sizzling bacon, and maple syrup. It was exactly the kind of place she loved, unpretentious and warm. Behind the counter, a young woman named Lila Quinn moved with an efficiency that belied her age. Lila, barely in her early 20s, had a sharp, observant gaze and a mane of dark curly hair tied back in a messy ponytail. She had grown up in Aspen Ridge and understood its rhythms, both the gentle currents and the dangerous undertones. She offered a quick, genuine smile. "Morning, ma'am? Just yourself today?" "Just me," Clara confirmed, her voice soft but clear. "A booth by the window if it's not too much trouble."
Not at all.
As Clara settled into the booth, her gaze drifted to the scene outside. A young man, probably a tourist, was setting up a camera on a tripod across the street. This was Tyler Brooks, a travel vlogger with a modest but growing following, known for his Authentic America series. He was a bundle of optimistic energy with a bright smile and a trendy beanie pulled over his blonde hair. He adjusted his lens, hoping to capture the idyllic charm of the diner, the perfect establishing shot for his video on the hidden gems of Colorado. Clara's peaceful moment was shattered by a booming voice that seemed to suck the warmth from the room. "Well, well, look what we have here. More city money gracing us with its presence." The voice belonged to Roy Baxter. He was a large, imposing man in his 50s, a local contractor whose bulk was built more from beer and grievances than from hard labor. His face was perpetually flushed, and his small, calculating eyes scanned the diner as if he owned it. He wore a dusty work coat and a sneer that seemed permanently etched onto his lips. He was sitting in a corner booth with two other men, his quiet sycophants, who chuckled on cue. Clara chose to ignore him, turning her attention to the menu. But Roy wasn't a man to be ignored. He heaved himself out of his booth, his heavy boots thudding on the linoleum floor as he made his way over to her. The low hum of conversation in the diner faltered and died. Everyone knew Roy. Everyone knew to stay out of his way. He stopped beside her table, casting a large shadow over her. "Don't see many of your kind in here," he said, his voice dripping with false friendliness. "Usually stick to those fancy bistros up on the peak." Clara looked up at him, her expression calm. "I find the coffee here is much better," she replied politely. Behind the counter, Leela's smile had vanished. Her jaw was tight. She knew exactly what this was. Roy was the blunt instrument for Victor Lang. the developer trying to buy up the entire lakeshore. Roy's specialty was convincing reluctant sellers. Lila slowly reached under the counter, her fingers finding her phone. She propped it up discreetly between a napkin dispenser and a stack of menus, making sure the camera had a clear view of the booth, and pressed record. This wasn't the first time she'd seen him bully someone, but this time felt different, more vicious. Roy's sneer widened. "Is that right? Well, enjoy it while you can. Some of us are trying to preserve what makes this town special, not turn it into some playground for rich folks who don't belong." "I assure you I have no intention of changing your town," Clara said, her voice remaining steady, though she could feel a knot of apprehension tightening in her stomach. She thought of her late husband, a man of immense kindness and quiet strength. He would have known how to handle a man like this, not with aggression, but with a firm, unshakable dignity that would make a bully feel small. She channeled that memory, that strength. "Oh, I think you do," Roy shot back, his voice rising and drawing the attention of everyone in the diner, including Tyler outside, who now zoomed his camera in, intrigued by the unfolding drama. "I hear you're the one holding up progress over at the lake. Got a real nice offer for that property your son bought, but you're just too stubborn to see sense." So that was it. This wasn't a random act of hostility. It was targeted. It was about the house. Reed had warned her that the developer was aggressive, but she hadn't expected this. "The house is not for sale," Clara stated, her tone final. "My son bought it for our family." Roy leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. "Your family? You mean the son who's never here? The one who drops in a pile of cash on a house and leaves his old mother here to be a thorn in the side of hard-working local folks?" He rested his thick, grease-stained knuckles on her table. "This is a small town, lady. We have our own way of doing things. We don't appreciate outsiders coming in, buying up prime real estate, and refusing to play ball. It messes with the natural order of things." Clara could feel the eyes of the other patrons on her. She saw fear in some, annoyance in others, but no one moved to intervene. They were trapped in the web of small-town politics, afraid of a man who held sway through intimidation and connections. She felt a profound sense of isolation, a feeling she hadn't known since the first few weeks after her husband passed. But she would not be cowed. "There is nothing natural about trying to bully a woman into selling her home," she said, her voice quiet but ringing with authority. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I would like to enjoy my breakfast in peace." The defiance in her voice seemed to snap something in Roy. His face turned a shade darker, a deep blotchy red. The pretense of a conversation was over. This was raw intimidation now, and he was enjoying his audience. Roy's face was a mask of pure rage. The quiet, unyielding dignity of the woman before him was an insult he couldn't tolerate. In his world, power was loud, boorish, and physical. Her calm was a language he didn't understand, and it infuriated him. Clara knew she could not win a battle of wills with such a man. There was no reasoning with him. Her only option was to remove herself from the situation. With a grace that defied the tension in the air, she stood, placing a few crisp dollar bills on the table to cover the coffee she would never drink. "I wish you a better day, sir," she said, her voice a soft murmur, and turned to leave. That was the final spark. Her refusal to engage, her calm dismissal of him as nothing more than an unpleasant interruption, sent Roy over the edge. He moved with surprising speed for a man of his size, stepping in front of her to block her path to the door. "You think you're better than me?" he roared, his voice echoing in the dead, silent diner. Spittle flew from his lips. "You waltz in here, look down your nose at us, and then just walk away." Before Clara could react, he swept his thick arm across the small table. The heavy ceramic mug, half full of hot coffee, went flying. Clara gasped and flinched back as hot liquid splashed across the floor and the wall, a few scalding drops hitting the back of her hand. The sound of the mug shattering against the linoleum was like a gunshot. The shock of the act, the sudden violence of it, made her stumble. For a moment she was disoriented, her heart pounding in her chest. It was in that moment of vulnerability that Roy committed to his gamble. He saw her fear, and it fed the ugly fire inside him. He drew back his hand, the thick gold ring on his finger glinting under the fluorescent lights, and swung. The sound of the slap was sharp, ugly, and final. It cut through the silence, a sound that would be seared into the memory of everyone present. Clara cried out, a small, sharp sound of pain and shock. The force of the blow wasn't overwhelming, but the surprise and imbalance sent her staggering backward. Her heel caught on the leg of a chair, and she fell, crumpling onto the cold, hard floor. A collective gasp went through the diner. Patrons froze, forks halfway to their mouths. Across the street, Tyler's jaw dropped. His camera, still rolling, had captured the entire horrific sequence in perfect high-definition clarity. Behind the counter, Lila felt a surge of cold fury. Her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of the counter, her own phone still faithfully recording the crime. And then the bell above the door tinkled. The man who entered was the physical opposite of Roy. He was in his late 30s, dressed in a simple dark green flannel shirt, worn jeans, and sturdy hiking boots. The clothes were ordinary, but they couldn't conceal the coiled power in his frame. The broad shoulders, the lean muscular build of a man whose body was a finely tuned weapon. He moved with an unnerving economy of motion, a predatory grace. His eyes, a deep piercing blue that held none of his mother's gentleness, swept the room and took in the scene in a fraction of a second. He saw his mother on the floor. He saw the shattered mug, and he saw Roy standing over her, chest puffed out like a conqueror. This was Reed Bennett. At his side, on a simple leather leash, sat Shadow. The German Shepherd was a magnificent animal, 100 pounds of sleek black and tan muscle. His ears were erect, his dark, intelligent eyes fixed on Roy. He didn't bark or lunge. He sat perfectly still, radiating a calm, controlled energy that was somehow more terrifying than any overt aggression. Reed's gaze locked onto his mother. His expression didn't change, but a switch had been flipped. The calm facade was gone. The Navy SEAL was in control. He issued a single low command. "Watch." The word was barely a whisper, but Shadow responded instantly. He moved from a sitting position to a low crouch, a deep guttural growl rumbling in his chest. It was not the sound of an angry pet. It was the professional warning of a trained military asset. He didn't attack. He flowed forward, placing his body directly between Roy and the fallen Clara, his eyes never leaving the bully. The message was unmistakable. You will not take one more step toward her. Roy, who had faced down angry husbands and rival contractors, froze. His bravado, so potent just a moment ago, evaporated in the face of the silent, lethal promise radiating from the dog. He took an involuntary step back. Reed ignored him completely. He walked forward, his steps silent and measured, and knelt beside his mother. "Mom, are you okay?" His voice was gentle, the harsh edge gone, reserved only for her. "Reed," she whispered, her hand going to her stinging cheek. "I'm all right, dear. Just startled." He helped her to her feet with an easy strength, his eyes scanning her for any injury. He saw the red mark on her cheek, the splash of coffee on her hand, and something cold and hard settled in his gaze. Once he was sure she was steady, he turned his full, undivided attention to Roy. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The low, flat tone he used carried more menace than any shout ever could. "You just made a serious mistake." From a booth in the back of the diner, another man watched the scene unfold. Sheriff Dwayne Holt, a man in his late 50s with a face weathered by sun and cynicism, slowly lowered his coffee cup. He wore his uniform with a lazy, comfortable authority, the silver star on his chest polished, but his demeanor suggesting he hadn't had to do any real police work in years. He'd been watching Roy's performance with a look of bored amusement. Roy was a useful tool, and the old woman had been a nuisance. But this was new. The arrival of this quiet, dangerous-looking man and his military-grade dog was an unplanned complication. It seemed the sheriff would have to get involved after all, not to arrest Roy, of course not, but to manage the situation, to contain the fallout. He slowly pushed himself out of his booth, adjusting the gun belt on his hips, and began to walk toward the center of the diner, his face a mask of practiced official concern. Sheriff Holt ambled forward, his posture a study in practiced nonchalance. He approached the tense standoff, not with urgency, but with the weary air of a man bothered by a noisy dog. His eyes, however, missed nothing. He noted the phone in the waitress's hand, the tourist with the camera across the street, and the unyielding posture of the stranger. "All right, folks, let's just calm it all down," the sheriff said, his voice a folksy drawl meant to soothe and take control. He directed a familiar nod at Roy. "Roy, you've been drinking this early?" Roy, who had been momentarily paralyzed by Shadow's presence, seemed to find his footing at the arrival of an ally. "Sheriff, this ain't nothing. Just a little misunderstanding. This lady—" "I saw what happened," Reed cut in, his voice quiet but sharp enough to slice through the sheriff's feigned calm. He didn't look at the sheriff, keeping his focus entirely on Roy. Sheriff Holt finally turned his gaze on Reed. "And who might you be, son?" "He's my son," Clara said, her voice trembling slightly but firm. "Reed Bennett," Reed supplied, still not breaking his stare. "Well, Mr. Bennett," the sheriff said, stepping between Reed and Roy, a subtle move to break the line of confrontation. "In Aspen Ridge, we handle our own disagreements. No need for things to get out of hand. Why don't you take your mother on home and we'll call it a day?" It was a dismissal, a clear attempt to sweep the assault under the rug. Reed recognized it instantly. He had seen this same tactic in corrupt local jurisdictions all over the world. "This disagreement was a criminal assault," Reed stated flatly, "and I expect a formal report to be filed." The sheriff's folksy mask tightened. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face. "Now listen here, son. I'm the law in this town, and I say what's what." It was a heated moment. "No real harm done." Reed finally turned his head, his piercing blue eyes meeting the sheriff's for the first time. The sheriff felt an unexpected jolt, as if he were being assessed and found wanting by a predator. "My mother was knocked to the floor," Reed said, each word precise and cold. "There are at least a dozen witnesses, and that man," he nodded toward Roy, "is going to be arrested, or this will become a very different kind of problem." He gave the leash a gentle tug. "Shadow, heel." The German shepherd immediately broke his watch, backing up to sit perfectly at Reed's side, though his eyes remained locked on Roy. Reed put a steadying arm around his mother's shoulders. "Let's go, Mom." He guided her toward the door, moving with a purpose that no one dared to challenge. As they passed the counter, he made brief eye contact with Lila, giving her a single, almost imperceptible nod of gratitude. Once outside in the crisp mountain air, Reed settled his mother into the passenger seat of his rugged Ford F-150. He checked her cheek again, the red mark already beginning to darken. A cold, controlled fury simmered just beneath his calm exterior. He walked around to the driver's side, and before starting the engine, he pulled out his phone. It wasn't a standard smartphone. It was a rugged, encrypted device. He scrolled through a short list of contacts and pressed a name. The call was answered on the first ring. "Go for Bennett," a gruff voice on the other end said. "This is Reed Bennett," he began, his voice devoid of all emotion, a stark contrast to the gentle tone he used with his mother. "I'm reporting a targeted physical assault on a military dependent. My mother, Clara Bennett. The incident occurred in Aspen Ridge, Colorado. The assailant has been identified. Local law enforcement is on scene and appears to be compromised. I am requesting immediate NCIS liaison and a formal case file to be opened." He listened for a moment. "Affirmative. I have secured the dependent. We are proceeding to a safe location. I have multiple civilian video recordings of the incident. Will forward when secure." He ended the call. Meanwhile, across the street, Tyler Brooks was experiencing a vlogger's nirvana. His hands were shaking with adrenaline. He knew with absolute certainty that he had just captured the video of a lifetime. He didn't hesitate. He packed up his gear, rushed back to his rented cabin, and immediately began uploading the raw, unedited footage to his channel. He agonized over the title for a few moments, before settling on pure, uncut viral dynamite. Bully savagely attacks elderly woman. confronted by Navy SEAL and Canine Protector. He hit publish. The effect was instantaneous. Within the first hour, the video had 100,000 views. By the third hour, it had crossed the million mark. The internet's outrage was a tidal wave. The comment section was a torrent of fury and support. "That old man is a coward. Find him. Did you see that dog? That's a trained military K9. Good boy. Who is that hero? Someone get him a medal." The video was shared by every major veteran support group on social media. It was picked up by news aggregators, then by cable news outlets. The ripple effect had become a tsunami. In a sleek, glass-walled office in Denver, Victor Lang, a man in his late 40s with slicked-back hair and a suit that cost more than most cars, slammed his fist on his mahogany desk. Victor was the architect of the Aspen Preserve Project, a man who saw landscapes not as places of beauty, but as assets on a balance sheet. He was watching Tyler's video on his computer, his handsome face contorted in a snarl of fury. "Idiot!" he hissed, grabbing his phone. He dialed a number. "Get me Langford now." A few miles away, Mayor Garrett Langford, a man in his early 60s whose polished grandfatherly image concealed a core of pure avarice, was in a meeting about town beautification. His phone buzzed with an urgent text. He excused himself, stepping into his private office and answering the call. "Victor, this had better be important." "Your man Baxter is a liability," Victor spat, his voice tight with rage. "He's all over the internet assaulting some old woman." And not just any old woman. Apparently her son is some kind of special forces commando. Mayor Langford felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He quickly pulled up the video on his own computer. He watched the slap, the fall, and the arrival of the quiet, dangerous man and his dog. He heard Roy's voice loudly referencing the real estate deal. "This is a disaster," Langford breathed. "You need to fix this, Garrett." Victor's voice was like ice. "You and your pet sheriff. Bury it. Discredit the video. Pay off the woman. I don't care what you do, but if this mess jeopardizes the final land acquisition, the investors are going to want to know who to hold responsible, and I will give them your name." The line went dead. Back in Aspen Ridge, online sleuths were already at work. Using facial recognition and cross-referencing local business directories, they had a name in under an hour. Roy Baxter, owner of Baxter Construction. Within another hour, they had connected him to his primary client, Victor Lang, and the Aspen Preserve, LLC. And from there, it was a short leap to his most prominent political supporter, Mayor Garrett Langford, who had personally championed the zoning changes for Victor's project. The names Roy Baxter, Victor Lang, and Mayor Garrett Langford began trending on Twitter right alongside #JusticeForClara. The ripple had reached the shore, and it was about to crash down on them all. The meeting took place in the back room of a high-end hunting lodge, a place smelling of old leather, cedarwood, and unspoken agreements. This was Mayor Garrett Langford's unofficial office, a sanctuary of power far from the public eye of City Hall. Victor Lang was already there, pacing in front of a massive stone fireplace where a low fire crackled. He had driven up from Denver himself, his tailored suit looking absurdly out of place against the rustic backdrop. Sheriff Dwayne Holt leaned against a wall, cleaning his fingernails with a pocket knife, the picture of bored indifference. Mayor Langford entered and closed the heavy oak door behind him, shutting out the world. "The problem is contained," he announced, though his voice lacked conviction. Victor spun around. "Contained? Garrett, your problem has its own hashtag and is the #1 trending video in the country. My investors are calling. They're seeing headlines linking my company to a violent assault. Contained is not the word I would use. Roy is a fool," the mayor conceded, pouring himself a generous measure of bourbon from a crystal decanter. "But he's our fool. Dwayne has already had a word with him. He'll keep his mouth shut." The sheriff grunted his assent without looking up. "It's not about Roy keeping his mouth shut," Victor snapped, his voice sharp and loud. "It's about the woman's son, Reed Bennett. My people have been digging. The man is a ghost. No social media, no public records beyond basic military service. But he's not just a soldier, Garrett. He's a Navy SEAL, active duty. Do you have any idea what that means? It means he's a professional problem solver. And we, he gestured around the room, are now his problem. This was the core of their conspiracy laid bare in the firelight. For 2 years, the three men had run Aspen Ridge like their own private fiefdom. Their plan was simple and brutally effective. Victor Lang, with his deep-pocketed and morally flexible investors, identified prime real estate, especially the undeveloped land around Lake Serenity. Mayor Langford would then use his political influence to rezone the areas, create bureaucratic roadblocks for existing owners, and approve Victor's projects with suspicious speed. Their final and most crucial component was enforcement. That's where Sheriff Holt and men like Roy Baxter came in. When a homeowner refused a lowball offer, the harassment would begin. Sheriff Holt's deputies would suddenly start issuing tickets for minor code violations. Permit applications for simple home repairs would get lost in a sea of red tape. Then Roy Baxter and his crew would escalate things. Accidental property damage, late-night noise, verbal intimidation. Most people, especially retirees or vacation homeowners, would eventually break. They would sell cheap just to escape the nightmare. The plan had been flawless. They had already acquired 70% of the lakeshore. Clara Bennett's property was the final critical piece. It was the largest parcel with the best view, the key to unlocking the entire multi-million-dollar Aspen Preserve luxury resort. Her stubborn refusal to sell, inspired by her son's wish for her to have a peaceful retreat, was costing them millions in potential profits. The attack was supposed to be the final terrifying push. It was supposed to show her she wasn't safe, that her peaceful retirement would be anything but. "The son is just one man," Sheriff Holt finally said, closing his knife with a snap. "He's on vacation. He'll make some noise, file a complaint, and then he'll have to go back to whatever hole he crawled out of. In the meantime, I'll handle things here." "How, Dwayne?" the mayor asked, a note of desperation in his voice. "The FBI might get involved. NCIS, for God's sake." "Let them come," the sheriff said with a lazy smile. "They'll find a simple assault case. Roy will get a slap on the wrist. I'll make sure the report is airtight. Just a local dispute that got out of hand. Nothing connecting it to anything bigger. As for the son, we'll just keep an eye on him. Make sure he understands he's a guest here and that guests can be made to feel very unwelcome." Reed Bennett knew he was being watched. He had driven his mother back to the secluded lake house, a beautiful modern cabin made of dark wood and vast panes of glass that looked out over the still, clear water of Lake Serenity. He had settled her into a comfortable armchair with a warm cup of tea and a blanket, but his mind was already in mission mode. His vacation was over. As he stood at the large window, seemingly admiring the view, his eyes were actually scanning the tree line across the road. He had noticed it on the drive-in, a dark blue sedan parked in a dirt turnout a quarter-mile down the road. It had no reason to be there. It wasn't a fisherman's truck or a hiker's car. It was an observer's post. "Shadow perimeter," he said quietly. The German shepherd, who had been lying faithfully at his feet, rose without a sound. He trotted to the back door, and Reed let him out. Reed watched as the dog moved, not like a pet, but like a soldier, using the cover of the dense woods to sweep the property line in a wide, silent circle. Reed went to his duffel bag. From it, he pulled not clothes, but a series of small, discreet devices. He moved through the house with practiced efficiency, placing tiny wireless motion sensors at key entry points, doors, windows, and the long, dark driveway. He activated a small portable jammer that would disrupt any simple listening devices that might be planted nearby. Finally, he took out a small thermal monocular and scanned the woods again. He caught a fleeting heat signature from the blue sedan. 2 occupants. His peaceful vacation retreat had just become a forward operating base. He sat down across from his mother. His demeanor was calm and reassuring. "Mom, I need you to stay inside for a while. Keep the doors locked. Don't answer for anyone but me." Clara looked at her son. She saw the quiet intensity in his eyes, the subtle shift in his posture. She had seen it before in the rare moments between his deployments, when the weight of his hidden world would briefly surface. She didn't know the details of his work, only that it was dangerous and important. She knew he was a protector. "Reed, what's happening?" she asked, her voice steady. "The men who sent that man to the diner," he said. "They're not going to stop. The video going public has made them desperate. They're going to try to intimidate us into silence." He leaned forward. "But they've made a critical mistake. They think they're dealing with a scared old woman and her vacationing son. They don't know who we are. They don't know that we don't intimidate." He gave her a small, confident smile, a smile that said, "I have this under control." "They wanted a war over this piece of land," he said, his voice dropping to a low, determined whisper. "They're about to get one." The viral video was a fire, and Mayor Garrett Langford's first instinct was to stamp it out with brute force. His strategy, concocted with Sheriff Holt in the smoky backroom of the lodge, was twofold: discredit the source and silence the witnesses. The first target was Lila Quinn. She was in the middle of her afternoon shift, the diner still buzzing with gossip about the morning's events, when her manager, a perpetually nervous man named Frank Ellison, called her into his tiny, cluttered office. Frank was a man who lived in fear of bad reviews, fear of the health inspector, and most of all, fear of upsetting powerful people like the mayor. "Lila," he began, avoiding her eyes and shuffling papers on his desk. "Corporate got wind of the incident this morning and the video you took." "I was documenting a crime, Frank," Lila said, her arms crossed. She knew what was coming. "Be that as it may," he mumbled. "You violated company policy. Our social media guidelines are very clear. You can't post videos of the establishment or its patrons without authorization." "I didn't post it. I sent it to the police as evidence and to a local news outlet," she said, a small bluff to see his reaction. "Isn't that what a good citizen is supposed to do?" Frank finally looked up, his eyes pleading. "Please, Lila, don't make this harder than it has to be. My hands are tied. The mayor's office called directly. They suggested that your continued employment here reflects poorly on the diner's reputation." He swallowed hard. "I have to let you go. Your final check is here." Lila took the envelope without a word. She wasn't surprised, just angry. This was how power worked in Aspen Ridge. A quiet phone call, a veiled threat, and a good person was out of a job. She looked at Frank, a man she'd known for years and saw not a boss, but a coward. "You know what you're doing is wrong, Frank," she said quietly. "It's just business," he whispered, turning back to his paperwork, unable to face her. The second target was Tyler Brooks. Tyler was on a creative high. His video was exploding. His subscriber count was skyrocketing, and his phone was ringing off the hook with calls from national news producers. He spent the afternoon doing phone interviews, feeling like a real investigative journalist. As evening fell, he drove back to his small rented cabin on the outskirts of town, whistling, dreaming of the career-making opportunities this story would bring. The first thing he noticed was the front door. It was slightly ajar. The wood around the lock splintered and broken. A cold dread washed over him, extinguishing his earlier excitement. He pushed the door open. The cabin was a mess, but not from a simple robbery. His clothes were thrown about, his suitcase overturned. But the thieves had only been interested in one thing. On the floor in the center of the small living room lay the shattered remains of his MacBook Pro. The screen was spiderwebbed with cracks, the keyboard smashed in. His hard drives had been pulled from his desk and stomped on, their plastic casings crushed. It wasn't theft. It was a message. It was a complete and utter annihilation of his work. He sank to his knees, his hands shaking. Everything was on that laptop, the original video file, his backups, all of his vlogging work from the past year. He felt a wave of nausea. This wasn't some random break-in. This was professional. This was a warning delivered with brutal efficiency by someone who wanted to make sure he understood the stakes. He thought of Sheriff Holt's lazy smile in the diner. This had his fingerprints all over it. In a sprawling, tastefully decorated home on the wealthiest hill in Aspen Ridge, Celeste Langford watched the evening news. Celeste was the mayor's wife, a woman of quiet elegance and refined beauty. In her youth, she had been vibrant and idealistic, but 25 years of marriage to Garrett Langford had slowly eroded her spirit, replacing it with a carefully maintained facade of serene composure. She had long known about her husband's corrupt dealings, turning a blind eye for the sake of peace, for the life he provided. But lately, the compromises had begun to taste like poison. She watched the news report, which featured a short, grainy clip from Tyler's video. She saw the raw violence in Roy Baxter's face. She saw Clara Bennett, a woman her own age, falling to the floor. And in that moment, something inside her broke. This wasn't about zoning laws or backroom deals anymore. This was about cruelty. It was about the ugly, rotten core of the man she had married. Just then, her husband walked into the room, loosening his tie. "Ridiculous, isn't it?" he said, gesturing to the television. "The whole country in an uproar over a barroom spat. I've already taken care of it. The girl at the diner is gone, and the tourist photographer has been discouraged." He said it with such casual arrogance, such a complete lack of remorse, that Celeste felt a chill run down her spine. He wasn't just corrupt. He was a monster who felt nothing. She waited. She waited until he was in the shower, the sound of the water masking any noise she might make. Then, with her heart pounding in her chest, she walked into his private study. It was his sanctuary, a room of dark wood, leather-bound books, and secrets. Behind a large oil painting of a mountain landscape was a wall safe. She knew the combination. She had watched him open it 100 times. Her fingers, cold and trembling, turned the dial. Right 22, left 58, right 11. The safe clicked open. Inside was his insurance policy. There were several leather-bound ledgers filled with his meticulous handwriting, detailing every bribe paid, every kickback received. There was a small digital audio recorder containing recordings of his most incriminating meetings with Victor and Dwayne. And there was a single black USB drive labeled Contingency. With shaking hands, she took it all. She carried it to her own small office at the other end of the house. She had her own laptop, her own secrets. She plugged in the USB drive and began to copy its contents onto a duplicate drive she kept hidden in a jewelry box. File after file transferred over. Spreadsheets, scanned documents, copies of offshore bank statements. She then used a small device to duplicate the audio from the recorder. Just as the last file finished copying, she heard the shower turn off. Panic seized her. She quickly ejected the drives, put her husband's originals back in the safe, and spun the dial. She had just hung the painting back in its place when he walked into the study, a towel wrapped around his waist. "Celeste, what are you doing in here?" he asked, a hint of suspicion in his voice. She turned, forcing a calm she did not feel. "Just looking for a book, dear," she said, pulling a random volume from the shelf. "I couldn't sleep." He looked at her for a long moment, his eyes narrowed. Then he seemed to relax. "Well, don't worry your pretty head about all this business. It will all be over by tomorrow." As he walked out, Celeste leaned against the bookshelf, her legs weak with relief. He was wrong. It wasn't over. For him, it was just beginning. Clutched in her hand, hidden in the folds of her robe, was a small USB drive containing enough evidence to burn his entire world to the ground. The phone call came in the late afternoon. Clara was sitting by the large window overlooking the lake, a book open in her lap, though she hadn't turned a page in an hour. The house, which Reed had turned into a fortress of quiet surveillance, felt both safe and confining. The caller ID was blocked. She let it ring 3 times before answering, her voice cautious. "Hello? Mrs. Bennett." The voice on the other end was female, cultured and strained, as if holding back a torrent of emotion. "My name is Celeste Langford. I am the mayor's wife." Clara's grip tightened on the phone. She glanced toward the kitchen where Reed was methodically cleaning a piece of equipment, his movements precise and silent. "Yes? I know this is a terribly forward request," Celeste continued, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "But I was hoping you might be able to meet me. I feel I owe you a personal apology for what happened at the diner, for the inhospitable welcome you've received in our town." It was a plausible excuse, but Clara's instincts told her this was about something far more significant than an apology. "I'm not sure that's a good idea, Mrs. Langford." "Please." Celeste's voice cracked slightly. "There is an old chapel, St. Jude's, on the edge of town. It's always quiet. In 1 hour, I wouldn't ask if it weren't a matter of the utmost importance. Clara paused, her mind racing. A public apology from the mayor's wife would be a powerful statement, but the secrecy, the urgency, this felt different. It felt dangerous. She looked at Reed again. He was her protector, but she was not a passive participant in this battle. She had a role to play too. "I will be there," Clara said, her decision made. When she told Reed, his face hardened. "No, it's too risky. It could be a trap. It could also be a cry for help," Clara countered, her gaze unwavering. She sounded desperate, Reed, not threatening. Sometimes you have to take a calculated risk to find an ally. Reed saw the steel in his mother's eyes and knew he couldn't argue. He had inherited his resolve from her. "All right," he conceded. "But you're not going alone. I'll follow. I'll be out of sight, but I'll be there. If anything feels wrong, you turn around and walk away. Understand?" St. Jude's was a simple stone chapel set back from the road amidst a grove of ancient aspen trees, whose golden leaves trembled in the afternoon breeze. It was a place of peace, a stark contrast to the ugliness that had infected the town. Celeste Langford was already there, sitting in a front pew, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She looked smaller and more fragile than Clara had imagined, a woman drowning in the gilded cage her husband had built for her. Clara sat down in the pew behind her, leaving a respectful distance. "Mrs. Langford." Celeste turned, her eyes red-rimmed but her expression resolute. "Thank you for coming, Mrs. Bennet. And please, call me Celeste." She looked around the empty chapel. "I chose this place because I need to confess." She took a deep, shaky breath. "My apology is sincere, but it's not why I asked you here. I came to give you a weapon." From her handbag, she produced a small black USB drive and held it out. Her hand was trembling. "My husband," she began, her voice low and intense, "has gone too far. For years, I told myself the deals he made were just politics, the price of progress. But what I saw on that video, what his man did to you, it wasn't politics. It was evil. He is destroying this town, hollowing it out from the inside for profit." Clara looked at the drive, then back at Celeste's face. She saw not deceit, but a profound and painful sincerity. This was the act of a woman who had reached her breaking point. "Why give this to me?" Clara asked, her voice a gentle prompt. "Why not take it to the sheriff?" Celeste gave a short, bitter laugh. "Sheriff Holt? He is my husband's lapdog. He enforces my husband's will. Any evidence I gave him would disappear, and I would likely have a tragic accident soon after." She leaned forward, her eyes pleading. "I'm giving it to you because of your son, my husband and his friends. They understand bullies and money and threats. They don't understand men like Reed. They are terrified of the world he represents. A world where there are rules they can't bend, and consequences they can't buy their way out of." She pressed the drive into Clara's hand. The cool plastic felt impossibly heavy. "Everything is on there," Celeste whispered. "The ledgers, the secret bank accounts, recordings of him and Victor and Dwayne planning how to intimidate people. Enough to put them all away for a very long time. I trust you, and by extension your son, to get this into the hands of people who are beyond my husband's reach." Clara closed her hand around the drive. She understood the immense risk Celeste was taking. This was not just an act of conscience. It was an act of profound courage. "You are a very brave woman, Celeste." "No," Celeste said, standing up, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. "I am a coward who has stayed silent for too long. I pray I am not too late." With that, she turned and walked quickly out of the chapel, leaving Clara alone in the silence with the key to Aspen Ridge's salvation. When Clara returned to the lake house, Reed was waiting by the door, his posture tense. He relaxed slightly when he saw she was unharmed. "Are you okay? What happened?" Instead of answering immediately, she walked to the dining table and placed the small USB drive in the center. "Celeste Langford gave me this." Reed looked from the drive to his mother's serious expression. "She says it's everything," Clara explained. "Proof of the entire conspiracy. She believes the local police are compromised, and that only you would know how to get it to the right authorities. Reed picked up the drive, examining it as if it were an unexploded bomb. He recognized the gravity of the moment. This small piece of technology had just transformed their defensive posture into an offensive operation. Clara had not just met with an ally. She had secured the critical intelligence that could win the war. He felt a surge of pride in her quiet strength and sharp judgment. She was every bit the warrior he was, just in a different arena. He went to his duffel bag and retrieved a heavily armored matte black laptop. It was a military-issue encrypted device designed for fieldwork. He powered it on, the operating system a stripped-down, secure version unfamiliar to any civilian user. He plugged in the USB drive. Files and folders bloomed across the screen. He clicked one open. It was a spreadsheet meticulously detailed with columns for dates, names, and payment amounts. He saw names he recognized. Roy Baxter, several town council members next to figures that were clearly payoffs. He clicked on an audio file. Mayor Langford's voice filled the quiet room, clear and damning. "Dwayne will handle the vlogger. Make it look like a robbery. We need that video to disappear." He opened another file. It was a scanned deed transfer showing a property sold by a harassed family to a shell corporation for a fraction of its value. The shell corporation was owned by Victor Lang. He sat back, a slow breath escaping his lips. It was all there, a systematic criminal enterprise laid bare. He looked at his mother, his expression grim but resolute. She was right. This is everything. He picked up his encrypted satellite phone and made a second call to his contact in Special Operations Command. "This is Bennett," he said, his voice hard as steel. "The situation here has escalated. I have come into possession of significant evidence detailing a multi-level criminal conspiracy involving public officials. The evidence is digital and time-sensitive. I am formally requesting an immediate and direct handoff to a joint NCIS and FBI task force. This needs to come from the top down. I repeat, the local authorities are compromised. This needs to be a federal operation, and it needs to happen now." The arrival of the federal government was not a thunderous raid. It was a quiet, creeping dawn. 2 black Suburbans, devoid of any official markings, rolled into the sleeping town of Aspen Ridge, just as the first pale light of morning broke over the eastern peaks. They didn't use sirens. They didn't need to. Their silent, purposeful advance was more intimidating than any sound could be. The late vehicle pulled up the long driveway to the lake house. Reed was already waiting on the porch, Shadow sitting calmly at his side. He had been up all night watching, waiting. A woman in a crisp, dark pantsuit stepped out of the passenger seat. She was in her 40s with dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, and a sharp, intelligent face that held no room for pleasantries. This was Special Agent in Charge, Sofia Delgado of the FBI's Denver field office, a woman known for her meticulous attention to detail and her utter intolerance for corruption. "Mr. Bennett," she said, her voice a low, professional alto. It wasn't a question. "I'm SAC Delgado. We spoke to your CO. Thank you for securing the asset." "Agent Delgado," Reed replied, nodding. "My mother is inside. The drive is on the kitchen table." Sophia's team, a mix of FBI and NCIS agents, moved with a quiet, synchronized efficiency that Reed recognized and respected. They swept the house for bugs, established a secure communications link, and treated his mother with a gentle professional deference. A forensic technician in a polo shirt and slacks took the USB drive from Reed, placing it in a static-proof evidence bag. "The evidence you and your mother have provided is substantial," Sophia said, standing with Reed on the porch as her team worked. "It corroborates several ongoing investigations into Mr. Lang's activities across multiple states. What started as a local conspiracy here is turning out to be a branch of a much larger criminal enterprise." She looked out at the tranquil lake. "We're calling it Operation Clean Slate, and today we're wiping this town's slate clean." The first domino to fall was the mayor. Garrett Langford was awake. He hadn't slept. He'd spent the night drinking bourbon and staring at his phone, watching his carefully constructed world burn down on social media. The final blow had come an hour before dawn. A call from a panicked Victor Lang. "They know, Garrett. They know everything. My sources say the feds are moving. A joint task force. After the call ended, Langford had walked to the large window in his study, the same window where his wife had stood just the night before. He saw them then, the black Suburbans, one parked discreetly down the street from his own house. He knew with a sudden, gut-wrenching certainty what had happened. It wasn't just the video. It was Celeste. She had done it. She had taken his secrets and handed them to his enemies. The one person he had never considered a threat had become his executioner. He felt a strange calm descend upon him. It was the calm of a man who has run out of moves, out of lies, out of time. He was a king whose castle was about to be stormed, and there was no escape. He walked to his heavy oak desk and unlocked the top drawer. Inside, beneath a stack of old town charters, was a Smith & Wesson Model 10, the revolver he had been issued when he was a young deputy decades ago. He'd kept it as a souvenir of a time when his ambitions were simpler, cleaner. He looked at the picture on his desk, a smiling photo of him and Celeste on their wedding day. They had both been so young, so full of hope. Where had it all gone so wrong? He knew the answer. It had been 1,000 small compromises, 1,000 little acts of greed that had snowballed into an avalanche of corruption from which he could never dig himself out. He heard the crunch of tires on the gravel outside. The FBI was here. He could hear their quiet, professional voices in the driveway. He would not let them put him in handcuffs. He would not let them parade him in front of the town he had both built and poisoned. He would write his own ending. When S.A.C. Delgado's team breached the front door. They found the study locked. They broke it down to find Mayor Garrett Langford slumped over his desk, the old revolver still in his hand. His reign was over. The second domino fell in the heart of town. Sheriff Dwayne Holt was enjoying his morning coffee, his feet up on his desk, when S.A.C. Delgado and 2 of her largest agents walked into his office without knocking. He slowly lowered his feet, a look of annoyance on his face. "Well, now you folks are a little far from the big city, aren't you? What can I do for the FBI today?" Delgado didn't waste time with pleasantries. She placed a warrant on his desk. "Dwayne Holt, you're under arrest." The sheriff actually laughed, a short barking sound. "Arrest for what? Defending my town from outside agitators? For conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and multiple violations of the RICO Act," Delgado stated, her voice as cold and hard as steel. "Your town was a criminal enterprise, and you were its chief enforcer." The color drained from Holt's face. The word RICO was a death knell. He knew what it meant. He looked from Delgado to the 2 stone-faced agents flanking her. The lazy confidence that had been his trademark for 20 years dissolved into raw panic. "This is a mistake," he blustered, standing up. "You have no jurisdiction here without—" "We have a federal warrant, Sheriff," Delgado said, cutting him off. "And as of this moment, your jurisdiction is limited to a 6-by-8-foot cell." She nodded to her agents. "Cuff him." The spectacle of Sheriff Dwayne Holt being led out of his own station in handcuffs, his face a mask of disbelief and terror, brought the town of Aspen Ridge to a dead stop. People came out of their shops and homes, watching in stunned silence as the symbol of corrupt, untouchable power was stripped of his authority and led away like a common criminal. The final domino fell at 30,000 feet. Victor Lang was not a man who waited for the axe to fall. The moment he'd hung up on Langford, he had initiated his escape plan. A private jet was waiting for him at a small executive airport outside of Denver. His destination, the Cayman Islands, where he had millions stashed in untraceable accounts and no extradition treaty with the United States. He was in his leather seat, a glass of champagne in his hand, watching the runway lights blur as the jet accelerated for takeoff. He felt a surge of relief. He had made it. He had outrun them. Suddenly, the plane's acceleration ceased. The engines whined down and the jet slowed, turning off the main runway. "What the hell is going on?" Victor demanded of the pilot over the intercom. "Tower is ordering us back to the hangar, sir," the pilot's tense voice replied. "They've closed the airspace. There are federal vehicles blocking the taxiway." Victor looked out the window and his blood ran cold. On the tarmac below, a line of black Suburbans had formed a perfect, inescapable barricade. When the jet's door opened, it wasn't the ground crew waiting for him. It was a team of FBI agents in tactical gear. As they led him down the steps in handcuffs, his expensive suit rumpled, his face pale with fury and defeat, Victor Lang looked less like a master of the universe and more like what he truly was, a common thief who had finally been caught. The weeks that followed the arrests were a strange, quiet time in Aspen Ridge. The storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape that was both shattered and cleansed. The federal presence, once a fleet of black Suburbans, had dwindled to a small, discreet team of auditors working out of a temporary office in the town hall. The names Langford, Holt, and Lang were spoken only in hushed, cautionary tones, like figures from a dark local legend. The state moved quickly to prevent a power vacuum. They appointed an interim town manager, a sharp, competent woman in her 50s named Camille Rousseau. Ms. Rousseau had a reputation as a fixer, a specialist in municipal recovery who was dispatched to communities in crisis. She had a calm, no-nonsense demeanor and an air of unimpeachable integrity. That was exactly what the wounded town needed. One of her first official acts was to call a town meeting, not for recriminations but for rebuilding. In the meantime, the town began to heal in small, everyday ways. At the Mountaintop Diner, a regional manager from the corporate office arrived. He fired Frank on the spot for his cowardice and complicity. Then he walked over to Lila Quinn, who was helping out as a volunteer, and offered her the position of general manager. Lila, stunned but resolute, accepted immediately. The diner, the scene of the initial crime, became the first symbol of the town's recovery, a place where integrity was now the main course. Reed and Clara, who had planned to leave once the immediate threat was gone, decided to stay. Their quiet vacation had become something else entirely. They felt a sense of responsibility, a connection to the community they had inadvertently thrown into chaos, and now had a chance to help rebuild. At Ms. Rousseau's request, Clara, with her quiet wisdom and unshakable moral compass, agreed to co-chair a new citizen oversight committee tasked with ensuring transparency in all future town contracts and governance. The night of the town meeting, the community hall was packed. There was a palpable tension in the air, a mix of anxiety, grief, and a fragile, flickering hope. Ms. Rousseau ran the meeting with cool efficiency, laying out a clear step-by-step plan for financial audits, a special election, and community-led development initiatives. Then, halfway through the meeting, the back doors opened, and Roy Baxter walked in. A wave of silence washed over the hall. He was thinner, his face pale and drawn. He was no longer the swaggering bully from the diner, but a humbled man who looked as if he were carrying the weight of the entire town on his shoulders. He walked slowly up the center aisle, not to the stage, but to a public microphone set up for citizen comments. He stood there for a long moment, looking out at the faces of his neighbors, faces filled with contempt, anger, and suspicion. He cleared his throat, his voice rough and unsteady. "My name is Roy Baxter," he began, his voice cracking, "and I have no right to ask for your forgiveness. What I did, there's no excuse for it. I was a bully. I was a coward. I let greed and resentment turn me into a monster." He looked directly at the front row where Clara and Reed sat. "Mrs. Bennett, Mr. Bennett, I am so sorry for what I did to you. I attacked you, Mrs. Bennett, because I was told to, because I thought it was the easy way, but mostly because I was weak. I was afraid of the changes happening in our town, and instead of facing them with courage, I chose to face them with hate." Tears were now streaming down his face, and he didn't bother to wipe them away. "I have cooperated fully with the federal prosecutors," he continued, his voice growing stronger with conviction. "I've told them everything I know about everyone involved. I'll take whatever sentence they give me, but that's not enough. That's just punishment. It doesn't fix anything." He took a deep breath. "So, starting tomorrow, my company, Baxter Construction, will be offering its services free of charge to every single family that was harassed or targeted by Langford's scheme. If your fence was broken, we'll fix it. If your property was vandalized, we'll repair it. I'll use every dollar I have left to try and undo some of the damage I helped cause." The hall was utterly silent. No one had expected this. It was more than an apology. It was an act of restitution. Roy's shoulders slumped. "That's all I have to say. I'll leave you in peace now." He turned to walk away, but Reed's voice, calm and clear, stopped him. "Mr. Baxter, Roy froze, turning back, his face a mask of dread, expecting a final damning condemnation. Reed stood up. He did not look angry. He looked assessing. "Your apology is a start," he said, his voice carrying through the hall. "Your actions will determine if it's a genuine one. This town doesn't need more division. It needs people willing to rebuild what was broken." He looked at his mother, who gave him a small affirming nod. "My mother and I," Reed continued, "accept your offer to help this community heal. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was something more important. It was a chance. It was an acknowledgement that even the worst among them could choose a different path." A ripple of applause started in one corner of the room, then spread, hesitant at first, then growing stronger. It was not for Roy the bully, but for the possibility of redemption. In the days that followed, the town truly began to change. Roy Baxter was true to his word, his trucks becoming a common sight as his crews repaired damaged property, their work a quiet daily apology. Reed found himself an unlikely community figure, his quiet strength a source of reassurance for many. But it was Shadow who became the town's true icon. The children, no longer afraid, would approach him cautiously in the park, and he would greet them with a gentle nudge of his head. He became a symbol, not of the violence that had brought him into their lives, but of the quiet, unwavering protection that had saved them. He was Aspen Ridge's guardian, a silent promise that the town was safe. Now, one evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple, Reed and Clara sat on the porch of the lake house. The air was cool, and the only sound was the gentle lapping of the water against the shore. "You know," Clara said, a soft smile on her face, "this wasn't exactly the peaceful retirement vacation you promised me." Reed looked at her, his expression gentle. "No," he admitted. "It wasn't." "You were wonderful, Reed," she said, placing her hand on his. "You protected all of us." "Protecting you is always my mission, Mom," he replied quietly. "That never changes, no matter where we are." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. The house on the lake was no longer just a property on a map, a point of contention. It was home. It was the place where a family had stood their ground, where a community had found its courage, and where, after a long and painful storm, a new dawn had finally broken over Aspen Ridge. If this story of courage, faith, and redemption touched your heart, please help us spread this light to others. Share this video with someone who needs a message of hope. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that honor integrity and uplift the human spirit. And please comment below. Which character's quiet strength inspired you the most? Was it Clara's gentle defiance, Reed's protective calm, or Celeste's brave decision to do what was right? We pray that God blesses every single one of you watching. We pray that He gives you the strength to stand firm in your values and the courage to be a protector for those in need. If you believe that good will always triumph over greed and that light will always scatter the darkness, please share your faith with us by writing Amen in the comments below. Thank you for being a part of our community. Be safe and be blessed.